This is the first time I've done this without being able to see my audience, so it's going to prove somewhat difficult for me, I think. Hopefully Sinead will be able to assist me. She'll be dialing you in when you need to ask questions. Bit of an introduction. I'm Steve Beswick. I've worked for JOMC man and boy for 14 years. Originally a manager for BNFL, British Nuclear Fuels, managed a number of their plants. But since joining JOMC, I've worked with Bombardier, Nestlé, Northern Foods, Pilkingtons, United Utilities, Warburton's, Toyota, Premier Foods, among others. Subject today, sustainability, one of the most difficult things to accomplish in any culture change program, but essential if the gains are going to be made. So a very important facet of any culture change process. The format is I'll pause at certain times during the delivery to allow people to ask questions, and it's somewhat complicated to ask questions. You should have a raise your hand button. So when we stop and we're ready to ask, and you want to ask a question, if you press the raise your hand button, and if you're using, and if you press the raise your hand button, Sinead will be able to see who's waiting to ask a question. And I'm afraid she'll have to pick you pretty much at random, and we'll take a couple of questions each time we pause. If you're using your phone to speak, you'll have to look at your audio pin and dial in the audio pin and hash to actually be heard. Okay, so we'll move on with all the technical details out of the way. The agenda today, I'll do a really quick introduction to JOMC, just in case anyone's never heard of us. Look at what the standard elements of a culture change program tend to be, by no means comprehensive, but you know, the major elements. Why bother with data capture? What are the reasons behind doing it? And what to collect, what to do with it, how can it benefit us? And then getting beyond the numbers, promoting real interaction out in the workplace as well. And then finally, a discussion, Q&A at the end of the day, or end of the hour. Introduction to JOMC. Okay, this is a sample of the JOMC client list. As you can see, a lot of well-known organisations there. We've been active in culture change for 20 years, and this is, as I say, just a sample of the people that we've worked with over that time. It represents broadly every industry sector. We have an enviable track record of success in culture change, principally with H&S, but we're also working in the areas of quality and also in healthcare, as the NHS logo suggests there. So enough of JOMC. Let's move on to core elements of a culture change program. Okay, if you're embarking on some sort of program of culture change, the chances are you will need to do some sort of culture assessment. You need to establish where you are to work out how you can improve. The best culture change assessments will show you areas where your culture is weak to allow you to produce a roadmap to work out how you're going to move forward in the process of improving the company culture. Quite often, you'll need some sort of management motivation workshops to enable them to realise their part in changing the culture and their leadership key safe behaviours. How do they lead? What are the things that they do or don't do that they should do to move things forward? What are the signals that they send out to their workforce? You will also need some sort of team workshops. Quite often people in the work teams think that safety is done to them and that they don't have a real stake in safety as such. So we need to impress on them, and that's through a training workshop or other means, that they can get involved, they can take responsibility to some degree for their own safety. They do have control, and it's up to us to actually demonstrate to them that that's a possibility. Whatever else happens, you will need some sort of process of workplace behavioural observations or personal engagements. This is a real fundamental, a real cornerstone of any process. You've got to be able to engage with your people out there in the workplace and actually change the way they see their working lives in terms of H&S, and also enable them to get directly involved in the process of safety improvement in the workplace. Okay. So what is the ongoing part of the process? Well, you do your leadership workshops, you do your work team workshops, but the ongoing part of the process is going to be the observation personal engagement system, which ultimately is the engine of change. This gives us a problem, though, because over time, the quality of the conversations can degrade, leading to the process becoming discredited. Sometimes the process stagnates. The same conversations are being carried out by people repeatedly. Nothing new is being found. Quality issues with the conversations, such as only finding unsafe activity. So suddenly the process becomes a system for snagging people rather than necessarily reinforcing their safe behaviour as well as looking for unsafe activity. Perhaps the discussions become facile and not really in-depth. People don't dig deep enough. People don't involve the respondent enough when they're carrying out the discussions. These are things that can go wrong. 70% of the benefit lies in the actual engagement with the individual. You're trying to change the way this individual sees the world, and that will be the major benefit from the conversation. But we can't ignore collecting data too, because the data collection allows this to become a process rather than just an isolated discussion. Any process requires management, and that, in this case, that will mean you'll certainly need some sort of steering group overseeing the data coming back from the conversations, overseeing the performance of the observers, coaches, call it what you will, that are out in the workplace carrying out these discussions. And just to underline the importance of a high rate of good quality conversations, there's an example here. This is Bombardier Transportation. They service trains in the Midlands. What you can see is the rate of conversation in purple, climbing, and the injury rate dropping. And what do you know, a period of stagnation in the middle there. This covers a 4-year period, by the way, so quite an extensive period, but as you can see, they've pretty much achieved 0 LTIs at this point. Now, I'm an engineer, unfortunately, and I do tend to deal in cause and effect. And when I look at this, I think, well, what if we tracked rainfall against injury rate or sunshine against injury rate? Would we get the same results? Well, yeah, who knows? But I've seen so many of these graphs over the years from different companies, different industry sectors, showing the same story. I'm actually convinced there's a link between the number of good quality conversations that you do in the workplace and the injury rate, an inverse link. Just to underline that, here's a graph from Northern Foods, one of their food preparation factories, and what we've got here is increased discussion rate and reducing injury rates, so very much similar to the previous slide. Okay then, so the rate of conversation is important, and the quality is important. We can also collect data as well. Data collection allows you to do the following. To monitor the rate of engagement, we've established that's important. To look at observer performance as well. The best data management systems will allow you to monitor what your observers are doing. Not so that you can beat them about the head when they don't do things as they should, but to allow you to mentor them, allow you to nurture them, and allow you to make the process better by monitoring what's happening out there. We can look at the discussion quality to some degree as well. You look at safe versus unsafe on the better systems, the comments left, when and where was the discussion done, and of course, what was the subject? Because we need to be able to monitor trends in behaviour. So one of the most powerful things you can do with any data management system is to monitor the trends in behaviour, because this allows you then to look at the bottom of the accident triangle, establish root cause, you can predict injury and take corrective action before the injuries occur. So the behavioural trending, really, really important. We can use it to predict tomorrow's injury, and that allows us to get ahead of the game. Okay. But there are some challenges. What I'm going to list now are some classic examples of where things can go wrong in a culture-based safety program. The big one is people don't do it. They don't do their conversations. They don't do their engagements. You have to set targets to achieve the discussion rate, and you have to monitor what people are doing. The Engage database that we're going to be demonstrating later on will be looking at this and actually encouraging people to carry out their conversations through a fairly radical development, which is a social networking front end on the database, which we'll be exploring later on. That does encourage people to carry out discussions. People do the discussions but don't enter them. So I'm out there, I carry out my discussion, but the system's too bureaucratic, it's too involved. I don't enter my discussion. And you'd be surprised how frequently that happens. So fundamentally, the individual has done the bulk of the task, and it's just too much trouble to do the final bit. So any system you have has to be user-friendly. Then we get into quality. Quality of the discussions is something that can quite often go off the rails. If we have targets, then with the best will in the world, there's a possibility that come the 29th of the month, when I haven't done my engagement, I may well make something up on my desk. I know it's a terrible thing to say, but sometimes it happens. Or I may just open the window and shout at someone who's crossing the yard without their high-vis jacket on, and I'll call that a conversation. So we can get that extreme degrading, but we can see less significant degrades of the conversation, or less obvious degrades of the conversation. To what extent are people carrying out fully interactive discussions, employing active listening, really working to expose at-risk activity and solve the problem in a participative fashion? Most of these issues have to be solved by mentoring, but a good database, a good data management system will flag these issues up and bring to your attention that they actually need dealing with. The other thing that happens on conversation quality is people get locked into only talking about or only logging what they see rather than what they discuss. It's almost more important in these systems that not what you see, not what you observe in terms of behaviour, but what is revealed in the discussion, and I'll demonstrate that with an example later on. The final figures here, and we are going to look at these elements, what should we collect, how to do it, how to make sense of it all. The final figures are here, demonstrate you probably need an electronic database to manage the volume of discussions that you have coming back at you. If you have an organisation of any size at all, flicking through card returns won't do it for you. Ultimately, you're going to need some sort of electronic database to manage the information. Okay. I think we should take some questions now. So Sinead, perhaps we could ask people if they want to, if anyone wants to ask a question thus far.
If anyone's got any questions, just put your hands up button on.
Okay, anybody? Hands up? Oh dear. Hello? You're online. I can't hear you very well, though. I'm echoing.
Dave,
Yeah.
I can't hear you very well. If you'd like to type your question today, I can give that to Steve.
Yeah, maybe if you pass it on, Sinead. I love technology. What have we got?
Okay, with nobody else at the moment,
Okay.
Steve, but I can always send over when it comes through.
Shall I carry on, Sinead?
Yes, carry on.
Okay, right, carrying on then. Okay, what information from the engagements would be useful? So we need to decide what information we're actually going to collect from the engagements. In our experience, these are the sort of elements that you're going to need to capture with your process. Who led the engagement? I said we were going to monitor observer performance to some degree. Well, we need to know who carried out the discussion. Here's a contentious one now. Who else was involved in the engagement? Well, initially, my advice would be to avoid that. The process has to be non-threatening. We want people to actually open up and tell us how it really is out there. I don't want them to tell us a story of what they think we want to hear. I want to hear how the job is really done, what the risks are that people are really taking. And to do that, the process has to be non-threatening. And the knock-on effect of that is you want to get to a situation where no one's name is linked with their unsafe activity, otherwise the chances are they won't open up. Now, as the culture of the organisation develops, you can get to a point where you could record people's names. But initially, certainly my advice would be to avoid the recording the name of the respondent. You might want to know where you're going to hold the discussion. You will certainly want to know what the key safe behaviour was, what the behaviour was you were discussing, whether it was safe or unsafe. We want to know what the actual behaviour was that we were discussing. Cause would be useful because cause points you a corrective action. So we need to know why. If someone's out there carrying out a task and they're carrying out in an unsafe fashion, we need to know what it is that's driving their behaviour so that we can put corrective action in place. Might need a risk rating to allow you to focus in on the things that are really causing problems. So some sort of risk rating to allow you to pick out the really, really worrying activities from some of the lower grade unsafe activities that are going on. Free text. Well, actually, funnily enough, we're going to talk a lot about free text today because of the social networking front end on the Engage system. But in your measurement system, it has to be menu-driven. If you have too much free text, you can't do searches on the system. So like a lot of computer systems, it has to be menu-driven because, for instance, there would be about 8 different ways of describing lifting with a straight back. But when you come to a search on the system on lifting with a straight back, you can't find all the information on it because various people have phrased that activity in different ways. So you need a menu-driven system. Okay, we're about to enter the twilight zone. Now we're about to enter the Engage system, which is the JOMC bespoke software, which we use to monitor behaviour in the workplace. It's a system that's been developed over a number of years in association with clients to produce a dynamic, user-friendly and effective database for processing data from workplace engagements. And it's been largely based on customer needs. So it's been a developments have come about largely driven by customer requirements. So a very user-friendly system. I'm just going to enter it now and show you some of the features of it, particularly the core data side, which is what are the locations, the behaviours, and the causes, for instance, that we're actually going to put into the system that we're going to use later on as the basis for our discussion process. So when you get a database, or this particular database, it's blank, and you need to put in the locations that describe the organisation and so on and so forth. So we're going to have a look at the core data side. And I'm going to try and shuffle between. There we go. Okay. So the section of the Engage database that we're in here happens to be the admin side. 3 levels of access. You've got the administrator, which is where I am now, which I can cause untold damage from here. So as a disgruntled employee, I can delete all the core data and cause all sorts of problems. But the admin individual has access to all sides of the database. And ordinarily you have one or two people who can do that in any organisation. The next level down is the moderator. So the moderator can actually enter conversations on someone else's behalf. That allows you to have a card-based system with people feeding cards back to a central administrator who unfortunately has to type in the details, and that individual will be the monitor and the moderator, and they will have a different level of access. And then the final level of access is the user, and they can only enter discussions in under their own ID, and they can't mess around with other people's discussions. Okay, so looking at the core data, the first thing you're going to need to do when you're using a database is to actually describe your company. You need to look at your company and you need to demonstrate, or you need to produce a location hierarchy that describes your organisation. Or usually, as you can see, there's several levels here. Usually 3 levels are enough to describe any organisation, maybe 4 levels. Yeah, and this describes JOMC because we're looking at our own data here. And these are the locations that we put in that we thought we would need to do sensible searches on the system once the system was up and running. So we're asking you, when you set this system up, to look at your organisation and work out what areas of it you're going to want to do searches on, to what level, how far are you going to want to drill down into the organisation, and to lay out the hierarchy, the location hierarchy of your organisation accordingly. The next area you might want to look at might be the behaviours. So we're going to produce a list of behaviours that reflect your organisation. Some of them would be generics. So for instance, if we look at moving around, you'll notice these are what we call headline behaviours. So these are top level behaviours, and beneath them you've got subgroups of actual behaviours. So you've got main groups and then you've got the actual behaviours underneath. So for instance, this could be generic. Moving around will work in a biscuit factory and it'll work just as well in the health service. Walking forwards, carrying hot drinks and so on and so forth. Usually 2 levels of hierarchy are sufficient with the behaviours, but the behaviours will need to reflect your organisation. So you will have some specifics. So for instance, well, you might, on a hospital, you might have putting in an IV line and the behaviours associated with that, which, believe it or not, you probably wouldn't get in the biscuit factory. So some of them will be specific to yourselves. Some of them will be generics that could apply to almost any organisation. But once again, you need to specify your key safe behaviours. And you'll notice they're all written from the positive point of view. So moving around with good observation, moving around walking forwards, carrying hot drinks, and so on. Yeah. Using ladders, 3 points of contact within safe reach, etc. All written from the positive point of view to prevent confusion. Just a couple of other interesting things on this database in particular. You can change all the terminology. So if you don't like the word behaviour, you can put action or activity. You can have any description you like. You can also have as many levels of hierarchy as you need as well. So we could have subgroups of beyond moving around. If you wanted to drill down, you could drill down to how are we moving forwards, for instance, and, as far as you like. And there is a variant with 14 European languages as well, so it's a pretty comprehensive system. One more element of core data that I will display is causes. You're going to have to decide what the likely causes are that might be relevant in your organisation. Usually it comes to a list of around 15, 16 causes, something along that sort of order. Most reasons for people behaving in an unsafe fashion would be covered by this list. We've expanded distraction because people get distracted by a variety of different things as well. So there's even a second level of hierarchy there on distraction as well. Why was the individual distracted? So you will need to specify your causes as well. Okay, and I will just get this to scroll up. There we go. Okay. I mentioned speed. Hello.
I to interrupt you, but we've got quite a few people that have got their hand that wanting to ask.
All right, okay then, fine. We'll take questions. If we've got a load of people, fire away then, Sinead.
Okay. Dave, have you got a question for Steve?
Dave, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, Dave.
Steve, well done on the seminar.
I can't.
My comment is on.
I'm struggling to hear you, Dave. Actually, there's loads of echo on the line. Can you try relaying your question to Sinead?
What? He has sent me a message here. Comment on behaviours must be very small.
Yes. A good observation there from Dave. If I've interpreted your question correctly, you do need to keep your behaviour list under control. It can be too easy to end up with several hundred different behaviours. And of course, obviously, the danger is then the data set becomes fairly meaningless. So, yes, you do have to be, a good point, Dave, you do have to be fairly selective in the ones that you're going to include. But you can usually cover all the bases without getting the list, making the list too unwieldy. Is there anyone else, Sinead, that you can...
Paul Hughes, you have a question on the phone?
Yeah, hi Steve.
Hello, you're not echoing, excellent, very good.
I'm on the telephone, that's why. I'm enjoying it, Steve. My first question really is to do with the software. We're obviously in construction and we're driven by very tight programs and our guys are already very, very busy. The question really is, on average, how long does it take to capture this data on the database?
Right. Great question, Paul, because that's where we're going next.
Right.
It will be a bit more long-winded today when I demo it because I'll be walking you through a sort of scenario, but ordinarily the entry of one discussion will take something like, I would say maybe a bit more than 30 seconds, something like that. It's very fast indeed, largely depending on whether you want to leave comments or not, because obviously that then depends on typing speed. But it's very rapid, because one of the things we recognised early doors was that if it's at all involved or at all slow or at all long-winded, then it doesn't happen for the reasons that you've outlined.
Yeah.
So we've made it as simple as possible. Oh, and by the way, the whole thing is web-based as well. So if you wanted to use this particular system on one of your sites, then you know, with any luck, you won't have to jump through hoops of fire with your IT people to get to use it, because you access it through a website out in the cloud there. Okay, so
finally, Steve, you move on. I apologise to anybody.
That's all right, no problem.
I mean, you may come on to this, but I may be jumping ahead. But so I apologise if I am.
All right.
Is the information on the conversations that you have, the engagement, are that entered anywhere electronically or paper-wise, and then entered back into an office? Is that the process, or am I jumping ahead?
No, you're fine. You've got two options. You either do direct entry, so you have terminals out in the workplace, and when someone's had a discussion, they go to a terminal, log on to the website, and just enter their discussion. Or alternatively, if that can't be achieved, and that might be difficult on a construction site, then you fill in a card that covers the detail of the conversation, and that would have to go back to an administrator then on the site, and they will spend time typing it in as a moderator to get the detail into the system. So there's a couple of ways of doing it, depending on whether you've got terminals around the factory or the site that you work at or not. Does that clarify it for you? Is that all right?
Yeah, Steve, I'll let you continue now. Thank you.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you very much. Yeah, I will move on now, ladies and gents. Okay, so we'll look at the speed of discussion entry, really. As we've said here, it's important. So, got a list of discussions here, and what we're going to do is we're going to have a discussion. Okay, then. So, I've been out on the JOMC food factory recently, and you didn't know we had one of those, did you? And I decided to talk to Jane. She's operating a machine which is making lasagna ready meals. And I talked to Jane, and we go through the detail of the job. And I ask her how she could be hurt today because she's operating safely. She points out the hazards and what she's actually done to prevent her injury. The workplace is tidy. She's wearing gloves. She's wearing ear protection. So basically, it's all good. And fundamentally, what I say then is well done for working safely. Okay. However, as we're going on, and I'm just going to make sure that I get credited with this discussion, you see, because I want to make sure I've made my targets. There we are, and it's about H&S rather than values, environmental quality. And today is 17th, and the time is probably something like 8:30, but we're going to put 8 o'clock in. And where's the location? Well, this might be a bit difficult for me because the JOMC food factory isn't on here yet, so we'll go for an external location. It's client premises. Okay. It's an individual. I'm just talking to Jane, and she is an out-and-about contact outside JOMC. Yeah, and it's handled by a practitioner only. So, Jane's working safely. So, while I'm there, I noticed that the feed hopper to this unit is above head height. So, being a cunning observer, and being a well-schooled observer, or coach, if you like, I say to her, well, how do you clean that hopper out on changeovers? And Jane says, well, I'm supposed to fetch podium steps to clean it. The word supposed is always a bit of a giveaway to an observer. And so what you ask then is, well, Jane, you said you're supposed to fetch steps. Well, what actually happens in practice? And Jane then says, well, sometimes we do it by climbing on the steelwork. Okay, we ask her then what the worst injury would be, and she says, well, probably could be a fracture or something like that. And we then ask one of the key questions, which is, why are you doing it that way? And she says, well, when we're moving from a vegetarian product to a meat product, the changeover times are very short. I have to get the podium steps unlocked by the supervisor, and sometimes I just don't have time to do it. So we now have a cause for the unsafe behaviour as well. So, given what we've just been through, we obviously talked to Jane then, and we persuaded her that, you know, it's not worth a broken arm just to complete the changeover in time. And we also say we're actually going to take this further because there's some systemic problems there that you've revealed in what's happening out there. Now, if I tick this box here, I can make it public. Now, this puts my comments on the front dashboard. So, I'm going to go into the actual behaviour and so on in detail in a minute, but I'm going to put some comments in. And as I said, Paul, this is going to be a bit long-winded because I'm demonstrating it. But there are problems with changeovers being too short on the lasagna line and the access equipment procedure is too long-winded. Do we have these problems elsewhere? Okay, so we've put in our comments, we've put in the background detail of the discussion. Now it's time to add the discussion. We're going to put this down as a non-conformance, just for argument's sake at this point. What behaviour was it we looked at? Okay, so we know Jane is working at height, and she's not really using she certainly isn't using proper means of access sometimes. We've not seen it, but she's told us that's what's happening, so it's valid to log it. Why is it she's doing it that way? Well, the safe behaviour is impractical from her point of view. You could put a number of other causes there, but I think this is the one that's going to be the most direct. Probability, well, I would say medium on there, and it could be high consequence if she falls off this steelwork. And then we add the observation. We also know that Jane was behaving safely in a lot of ways as well. So we can actually add another observation against this one. Come on, that's it. And we add a conformance in and look at the behaviour. And here we go. PPE. Jane was wearing the correct ear protection, so we can pop that in there as well. Okay, and that's adding a discussion. A bit long-winded this time for demonstration purposes, but as I say, it usually takes about 30 seconds or something like that. The next area of the database that I want to have a look at is the front end, the dashboard for member use. Unfortunately, this involves me logging in again, so I'll just go backwards a couple of screens, and let's just see if we can. There we go. Okay, and I have to log in as myself for this section. Okay. Now, before we talk about this, I will go back to the slide pack. Okay. Looked at discussion entry. Okay. There's a social networking aspect to this database, away from the numbers, if you like. Really, really useful part of this system. It is hard to inspire people with graphs and numbers. What they're inspired by is the narrative at the end of the day, the story behind things. And I've got to be honest, I'm a complete heretic regarding social networking, and when this was introduced, I was very skeptical that it was going to be useful, but it's one of the most useful developments that we've ever made on the Engage system. It provides a narrative, as it says there, it promotes interaction, and feedback is there from the moment you log in. You can see what's hot, what's interesting in the organisation, and I find it more useful now than the actual graphs, because it promotes learning in the organisation at a very grassroots level. Okay, so just a few things about social networking front end of the Engage database. So going back and having a look at that, if we can get this to do that, there we are. Here we go. So when you first log in as a user on the Engage database, this is what you see. Comments that people have made that they want to make public. Now, when I say public, I don't mean everyone on the web can see them. They're public to people who are users. So you're actually writing a comment, and other users in your organisation will be able to see those comments and respond to them. So it's limited to the system. It doesn't go out on the general web for everyone's edification or anything like that. There's a number of features here. You can choose to follow people, just like something called Twitter, is it? You can choose to follow people should you wish. The important thing there is you can follow your team. So you can select to follow your team, and what do you know, people can select to follow you as well. We also have a bit of target monitoring there as well. As you can see, I'm somewhat ahead of my target. Thank you very much. And you can see my comment there that I logged. So, for instance, there it is. And maybe I actually want to add something to that. So I'll have a look. And grab one on. Nick Wharton's responded to say he's seen something on similar lines. So plainly, we have an endemic problem. So we've got a dialogue going now. And I can also promote it if I wish to. Nick's obviously promoted it as well and said this is important. You can vote for certain discussions to bring them to other people's attention. And as I said before, I was very skeptical about this when it was introduced, and I find it an absolute bonus now. It's a fantastic way, of getting people. That wasn't clever, was it? Fantastic way of getting people involved. We'll just go back to the dashboard. once I've finished. There we go, got away with that one. Other examples, because we're a learning organisation, we talk about behaviour outside work as well. One of our number has plainly been up on the fells recently and has decided not to go too high because the winds were 50 miles an hour and the weather was getting nasty, and one or two people have commented on that as well. So just examples, but it shows you what's hot in the organisation and promotes real learning effectively. Okay, so that's the social networking side. We can also look at the useful, some other useful outputs from the system. So going back to my slide pack, which it would have gone directly to, that's it. Some other useful outputs. These are the things that we might want to look at: contact rate, who's doing it, who isn't. We need to perhaps do some quality checks and find out when the conversations are happening. Are they all happening on the 29th of the month, for instance, when everyone's trying to mention their to meet their targets? So I'm just going to run through here a few standard reports on the system so that people can see what the system will do for them. Okay, so going that way, that's it. So the system always has also has a custom report facility, so you can assemble your own report. If the default reports are not doing what you want, you can assemble your own. But I'm going to go with the default one. And so we'll start with observer performance. I'll have a quick look. Observer performance, the first thing we want to look at, obviously, is this contact rate, which I'm going to explain in a minute. And there we are. So, all through this last 3/4 of an hour, I've been banging on about the importance of the discussion rate, the rate of good quality discussions. In JOMC, we call it the contact rate. So the contact rate is how often any individual in an organisation might experience a discussion. So if you've got a 400-person organisation, you've got a contact rate of 10, then you'd be doing 4,000 discussions a year. So it's how often any individual might expect to experience a discussion. And our experience is you need to be shooting for a contact rate between 4 and 8. But obviously the more you can get, the better. So looking for someone to be spoken to at least 8 or even 10 times on over a year about the safety of the job that they're doing. And the contact rate is a very, very fundamental part of the system. Show the report. Now, JOMC, the numbers leave me cold. I always look at the graphs. So the system produces graphs, and this one shows the contact rate over the 3 months that we were looking at. And it's extreme, look, 52, 63, 49, all these big numbers, because we're a small organisation. In bigger organisations, it is actually quite hard to drive the contact rate. It can be difficult because, as we said, sometimes people don't do the observations they're supposed to. But in this organisation, yeah, we usually have quite high contact rates, so a little bit unrepresentative, really, but a very fundamental graph, that one. Okay, and by the way, all of these graphs can be copied out into Word, Excel, the data, PDFs, and I find that one more useful, actually exporting the chart picture. So you can assemble reports on what you're seeing too. I mentioned we were going to have a look at observers. We've looked at contact rates. So if we go back, we can actually look at how the individual observers are doing. So let's look at individual observer targets. And once again, this isn't to be used as a blunt instrument. This is really just finding out who's doing it, who isn't doing it, who might be having difficulty out there carrying out the discussions. So as we can see, most people are performing pretty well on there. They're above target. These right-hand columns show the percentage of safe and the percentage of unsafe discussions that people are doing, because we're looking for a spread between the two. If people are doing overwhelmingly safe ones or overwhelmingly unsafe, then maybe they need some coaching to either praise more or to look more deeply into what people are doing. Okay, so those are the main ones for monitoring observer performance. We can also look at when they did the discussions as well. So we get a bit of a spread here. And we had February is not much good. It looks at a month, the system. We'll go for April. And here we go. We can now see when the discussions were done in April. I don't find the lines particularly useful here, so I tend to go for bars, a little bit more informative. So there we are. Dates of discussions executed for the month. And we can see there is a bit of a spread. There's one particular day where someone's done 7 discussions have taken place. And there is a bit of end of the month syndrome there with 5 happening on the last day of the month, but not a bad spread really. Obviously, what we're trying to avoid is all the discussions happening towards the end of the month. Okay, I will finish actually, and then I'll take questions at the end. I think the way time is, I'm going to have to move forward, and I'll probably go for taking questions at the end if that's okay with everybody. So I will rather rudely plough on. Okay. Other reports. We also need to be looking at what the behaviours, what are the trends, what are people doing. Just get a couple of dates in here. Here we go, February to the end of April. First place to look is this particular report. Are you going to show it to me? Go on. Oops. System glitch, that's it. Okay. Red stuff, unsafe activity. Green stuff, safe activity. What you need to be aware of is, though, for instance, if we look at driving, this organisation always produces a lot of driving behaviours, or driving observations and discussions. Just because you've got a third of the column in red doesn't mean that a third of the JOMC employees are behaving unsafely behind the wheel, because inevitably people tend to focus on unsafe activity rather than safe, especially in an organisation as it is like this that tends to flay itself with nettles. So you do get a disproportionate amount of unsafe activity. It's not statistically you haven't got a third of your individuals behaving unsafely, but there's enough red there for it to be of interest. So what we're going to do now is we're going to drill down into driving behaviours and have a little bit of a look at what the detail is there. So I'm going to flag up all the driving behaviours. I could put any of them up, any of these behaviours up against each other. It just depends on what boxes you tick. So we could juxtapose driving with PPE if we really wanted to. I'm not sure it'd be very informative, but there we are. So those are the driving behaviours. And now we can show a report which is based just on driving. Let's have a look. What do you know? Number of areas of infringement. Now, for the purpose of this demo, what I've decided to focus on is 3-second gap, because 50% of the observations are in the unsafe area. And as I say, this isn't representative of what's really happening there, but there's enough of a volume there for it to be of interest to us. So let's have a look at driving with a 3-second gap. And we could look at that individual behaviour. What we're going to do is we're actually going to look at the root cause for that one. So, come on, root cause, Steve. That's it. Okay. So why is it people are driving out there and they're not maintaining a 3-second gap? So, go. And small organisation, not many observations, not a fantastically informative pie chart in this case. Four reasons why people are driving without a 3-second gap: frustration, distraction, 2 levels of distraction passed by personal reasons, and 1 common practice, which is a bit disturbing. Now, this might be a bit worrying if we look at this as a safety excellent organisation. However, we can also look at, to some extent, who it is that's driving without leaving a gap. And so I'm going to single out the JOMC employees from here. I'm going to go for 3-second gap again. And we'll see what we've got. Okay, so as it is, it's 1 employee that has logged a conversation that of somebody driving, an employee driving without the 3-second gap. The other, and this which makes the pie chart a bit of a farce really, but there we are. And this individual was distracted for personal reasons. So as a caring organisation, we could offer this person coaching if they want to reveal themselves, yeah? Or alternatively, we could send out a briefing note on breaks and techniques for not getting distracted at the wheel and concentrating and so on. All of the other ones were probably taxi drivers. So someone's had a conversation about GAP with a taxi driver while they're being driven along, non-company employee. Okay, and we can do this with any of the behaviours that we've got on the system there. A couple of final slides, and we should have 5 minutes for questions at the end. Okay, so going back to my slides. Okay, looked at trends, it's done. The information you get from any database is only any good if someone does something with it. Now, in an ideal world, and I'm a bit of a cynical individual, I'm afraid, in an ideal world, local management would interrogate the system and take action accordingly. Sadly, my experience is that this doesn't happen. It has to be driven by some sort of steering group or team of champions that interrogate the system, take the information off, compile reports, and to some extent then drive corrective action with people. So the functions of the steering group are to monitor the trends, take action on adverse trends, to target observers. So we know from the lasagna line we've got a problem with working at heights. One of the responses, there's a number of responses we can do. First of all, briefing note about reinforcing that the company doesn't want anyone to put themselves at risk just to complete a changeover. We can also get our observers to target those areas. We can say to the observers that when you're having a discussion, carry on through the discussion, ask open questions, talk about the concerns that the individual has got, but at the end of the discussion say, do you ever work at height? What do you do? How do you do it? So that we can start to build a bigger data set on that individual part of working life. We need to monitor the observers, as we say, and run campaigns. So we'd be doing a working at height campaign now based on that discussion that we had with the mythical Jane. Okay, so before we finish, final comments about the social networking dashboard. As I say, the reason you're getting so much about it is I was knocked out when it was introduced, and I didn't believe it would be any use. I put my hand up. Well, his hand's up there, look. And it's really, really made a difference. So, advantages. It's direct. It's peer-led. Nick was obviously demonstrating there, but it's an indication that people look at the dashboard, the front dashboard, and they are prepared to read the narrative, the story. That's what's important to people, to read that and actually contribute to it. This provides another dimension beyond the steering group, really, because there's no one involved. It's not driven by management, it's driven by the individuals that are actually carrying out the observations, the discussions. It's involving, of course it is. Stimulates conversation outside the original engagement. We have similar problems on other lines. All right, so this is an endemic problem, yeah? Crosses boundaries, different departments, yeah? Nick works in the Bolognese department, yeah? And he's commented on my original posting. It highlights what's important to people, tells you what's current in the organisation, actually to some extent takes the temperature of the business. Okay, I have one final slide after this one, just on other sources of information, but I can take more questions now. We've got about 4 minutes. Anyone got any hands up? Miss Foster.
There is no hands up at the moment.
Anyone got any questions at all? You're all very meek and quiet out there. I'll give you a minute or two, and then we'll move on.
Yes. We've got
one.
Paul Hughes, question.
Right.
Hi, Steve.
Hiya.
Just some observations. I've used sort of data caption devices and bits in the past.
Yep.
And I totally agree with your comments about it's only as good as the people who are using it, and the honesty and tracking do you use an incentive process for trying to encourage people to capture accurate data rather than sitting in the office and, oh dear, I've got my targets to meet this month?
What sort of incentives do you mean, Paul? Like financial or something like that, or
just not really, Steve. If the data's not true, then it becomes data that's not really useful.
Absolutely. Absolutely. No, you're quite right. And I once again, I have to hold my hand up. I mean, when I first came across this process, it was about 93 in the foundry at British Nuclear Fuels. He provided no support for my observer team at all. As long as they were doing it, I was happy, and I never gathered them together to say, well done, this is what we're doing with the information, this is how you're contributing to the safety of the plant, this is why it's important, and thanks for doing it. Never did it. So yes, you're right, you do have to support your observer team. So, and one of the ways you do that is with outputs from the system. So they call it extinction. If you perform a behaviour and nothing happens, you perform a behaviour and nothing happens. You perform a behaviour. By the third time, you're not going to do it again. So it's important that we provide support for our observer team. We also show that what they're doing is contributing to everybody's welfare. And of course, when you post a comment on the on the dashboard, then people can see a direct response as well. So there's a bit of encouragement there as well. But you're right, yes. Those are the sort of incentives. I rather facetiously mentioned a financial incentive, but I wouldn't do that. You're doing it really by demonstrating to people that they're actually improving the safety of the organisation at the end of the day. Okay.
Right, okay. Yeah. I mean, I've just made some notes as I've been going along, and I've just got 4. I wouldn't say the sort of negatives to the system, but there's some that they're things that I've thought about might be issues if I was to go to our board, for example, and try and sell a system that's going to improve behavioural safety, which I'm very keen on. I'll just read these lines out that I've made. Dependent on meeting targets set, understanding of system simplicity, incentive for users to input data, which we just touched on, and honesty of users, tracking. So those are things that have just been flagged up in my mind with using a system like this. And if you've encountered ways of overcoming those areas, then obviously you're not going to capture all that in the hour presentation, but I'd be interested to find out how you did that.
Well, we can talk offline, Paul. You know, I think that Sinead will be able to give you my contact details. If you want to ring me anytime, I can. Or you know, we have your contact details. I can ring you.
Yeah.
We can talk it through. Absolutely no problem. But yeah, we are pretty much out of time, afraid. I could take one more question from another person if someone's got something they're itching to ask.
And I've had one question on the board from Alan from Surrey University. Are European languages, are they available at all times, or do they need to be programmed?
Sorry, do they say again, Sinead?
Are the European languages available at all times, or do they need to be programmed?
No, they're available at all times. The front end is slightly different. Basically, when you log in, you get flags of all nations, and you click on the one that you that represents the language that you want. I think we've even got Estonian on here. You know, it's all hardwired, if you like. Yeah. Okay, I think I'll have to wrap it up because we're at 9 o'clock now, I'm afraid. I'm sorry I couldn't take as many questions as perhaps I wanted to. But one final slide. I'm going to move on. It's locked up. Yep. Other sources of information. We'll provide these slides plus screen grabs. You've got the JOMC box. We have a YouTube channel. LinkedIn groups. I need to be selective with these because some of them are not so good, but they're certainly a good source of information, the better ones. And, you know, we have a Twitter feed as well. You know, if you need to get in touch with us, or you want to get in touch with us, please do. I'm always interested to help. I hope you got something out of the last hour. I hope you found it interesting. And thanks very much for coming.